The phone buzzed against the glass coffee table, vibrating in short, rhythmic pulses. Emily Carter's hand hovered over it, her heart pounding in her chest. She glanced at her husband, Ryan, who was standing by the stove, flipping pancakes with a carefree smile. He had no idea. "Who's texting you this early?" Ryan asked, his tone light. Emily forced a laugh. "Probably Ashley with another playdate plan." Ryan chuckled. "You two plan those like military operations?" Emily nodded, but the truth sat heavy on her shoulders. The message wasn't from Ashley. She pocketed her phone quickly and kissed Ryan on the cheek before turning toward the hall. "I'll check it later." As she walked away, her smile dropped. She opened the message once she reached the privacy of their bedroom. "Tomorrow. Same place. Don't be late." Her stomach twisted, but she couldn't bring herself to delete it. She locked her phone and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall as if it held the answers she was too afraid to face. Ryan Carter was the kind of man people admired. In their Brooklyn neighborhood, he was known for his kindness, his work as a paramedic, and his unwavering devotion to his wife and their two children, Ava and Henry. Their family appeared perfect: weekend soccer games, Sunday morning pancake breakfasts, and spontaneous trips to Coney Island. Emily had been the center of Ryan's world since college. They had met in a campus coffee shop when Emily was studying journalism and Ryan was finishing his EMT certification. Their love story was the kind people envied, built on late-night talks, inside jokes, and dreams of a bright future. But somewhere along the way, something had shifted. That morning at breakfast, everything seemed normal. Ava was coloring at the table while Henry babbled in his high chair. Ryan poured syrup over the pancakes, laughing at Ava's insistence that hers needed extra sprinkles. Emily smiled, trying to soak in the moment, but her mind was elsewhere. When the doorbell rang, Ryan went to answer it. Emily's heart raced again. She half expected someone to be standing there, ready to blow her life apart. But it was just their neighbor, Mrs. Goodman, returning a borrowed casserole dish. Emily exhaled and laughed at her own paranoia. That night, as Ryan read bedtime stories to Ava and Henry, Emily stood by the window, staring at the glowing city skyline. The Brooklyn Bridge twinkled in the distance like a beacon of stability she felt slipping away. Her phone buzzed again. She picked it up with trembling hands. "See you tomorrow." She closed her eyes, guilt swirling in her chest like a storm. She had to make a choice. But choices weren't always simple. Tomorrow was coming, and with it, consequences she wasn't ready to face. The next morning dawned with a muted glow over the Brooklyn skyline. The city hummed to life as it always did, but for Emily, the world felt heavier. She moved mechanically through her morning routine, brushing Ava's hair, packing snacks for Henry's daycare, and sipping her coffee as Ryan read the morning paper. Ryan glanced up, his blue eyes crinkling as he smiled. "You okay?" Emily nodded too quickly. "Yeah, just tired." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "We should plan a weekend getaway. Just us." Her chest tightened. He was still trying, still believing in the life they'd built together. By the time Emily dropped Henry off at daycare and took Ava to school, her nerves were frayed. She parked outside the cafe where she was supposed to meet Ashley for coffee, but her hand hesitated on the door handle. The cafe had once been a refuge, a place where Emily and her best friend Ashley could vent about parenthood and swap stories about balancing marriage and careers. But lately, Emily had pulled away. She didn't want Ashley's advice because she feared what her friend would see in her eyes. Ashley was the kind of friend who saw through everything. She'd been with Emily through every milestone: college, her wedding, and both pregnancies. Ashley had always been protective, quick to call out anything that seemed off. Emily took a deep breath and stepped inside. Ashley was already there, waving from their usual table by the window. Her auburn hair was pulled into a sleek ponytail, and she was flipping through a magazine. Ashley grinned, standing to hug her. "It's been forever." Emily forced a smile and sat down. "I know. Things have been hectic." Ashley narrowed her eyes but didn't press, yet. As they sipped their coffee, the conversation drifted to their families. Ashley gushed about her husband's latest promotion, while Emily nodded and smiled in all the right places. "So," Ashley said, setting down her cup, "what's going on?" You've been acting distant. Emily froze for a heartbeat too long before shaking her head. Just stressed. Ryan's been working more shifts, and the kids? You know how it is. Ashley didn't look convinced, but let it slide. Well, we should plan a spa day or something. You deserve a break. Emily smiled weakly. That sounds nice. But her mind was elsewhere. She glanced at the clock on the wall and felt her heart skip. It was almost time. Meanwhile, Ryan's day at the firehouse was uneventful. Between calls, he joked with his team and polished the equipment out of habit. But something gnawed at him, a sense of distance in Emily's smile that hadn't been there before. Everything okay at home? His partner, Marcus, asked as they sat by the engine. Ryan shrugged. I think so. Emily's just off lately. Marcus nodded knowingly. Marriage has its seasons, man. Maybe she just needs some extra time. Ryan smiled, but the nagging feeling didn't leave him. As the hours passed, Emily found herself standing outside a high-rise hotel downtown. She hesitated before stepping inside, adjusting her coat as if it were a shield. At the front desk, a man was already waiting for her. His name was Jason, a handsome 19-year-old with tousled brown hair and a smirk that hadn't yet learned humility. Jason wasn't just anyone. He was someone Emily had met during a charity gala where he'd been hired as a caterer. Jason was young, magnetic, and reckless, the opposite of the stability Ryan represented. Emily's heart pounded as Jason stepped forward. You came, he said with a grin. She nodded, guilt already wrapping around her like barbed wire. We don't have much time. He led her toward the elevator, his hand brushing against hers. As the doors closed, Emily felt the weight of every decision pressing down on her. She had crossed lines she once thought unbreakable, but she was too deep to turn back now. The consequences were drawing closer. The hum of the elevator was the only sound as Emily and Jason ascended to the top floor. She watched the numbers flick by, each one feeling like a countdown to a mistake she couldn't undo. When the doors opened, Jason held out his hand. This way, he said, his voice low. Emily hesitated for a fraction of a second before following him down the plush hallway. Her heart raced as they entered the room, a suite drenched in sunlight with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the Brooklyn skyline. But the beautiful view couldn't distract her from the reality of what she was doing. Jason closed the door behind them and set down his bag. He smiled, the kind of smile that belonged to someone who had never truly understood consequences. Emily tried to muster that same sense of recklessness, but all she felt was fear and guilt. He walked over and wrapped his arms around her waist. You look beautiful. Emily closed her eyes and let herself melt into his embrace. She told herself she needed this, that it was an escape from the monotony of her life. But deep down, she knew she was just running. Jason wasn't the only secret in Emily's life. A few weeks earlier, she had reconnected with an old friend named Caleb. He was someone from her past, an ex-boyfriend who had resurfaced unexpectedly when they ran into each other at a local fundraiser. Caleb was everything Jason wasn't: composed, older, and deliberate. Where Jason was wild, Caleb was calculating. Emily knew it was madness to be entangled with two men at the same time, but in her fractured mind, she had justified it. Jason was the thrill, the rebellion. Caleb was the comfort, the familiar past. Later that afternoon, Emily sat by the window in the hotel suite. The city stretched out before her. Jason had fallen asleep, his arm draped lazily across the bed. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was Caleb. Are you free later? The message read. Emily stared at the text, feeling trapped by the very choices she'd made. She turned off her phone and stood, smoothing the wrinkles in her blouse. Jason stirred and blinked at her. Leaving already? Emily forced a smile. I have things to do. Jason pulled her back into the bed, his grin boyish and carefree. Stay a little longer. She felt her resolve weaken, but pulled away. I can't. Jason's playful expression dimmed as he watched her gather her things and head for the door. See you soon, he asked. Emily hesitated at the doorframe, guilt gnawing at her insides. Yes, soon. When she returned home later that evening, the familiar warmth of their apartment felt stifling. Ryan was in the kitchen, cooking dinner with Ava perched on the counter, helping him stir the sauce. "Hey, you're home." Ryan greeted her with a smile. "We're making spaghetti." Emily's throat tightened. She kissed Ava's forehead and set her purse down. "Smells great." Ryan handed her a glass of wine, his eyes filled with quiet affection. "You okay?" She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Caleb texted her again that night after the kids had gone to bed. "I'm waiting for you." Emily slipped out onto the balcony, staring at the lights twinkling across the city. Her double life was pulling her apart at the seams, and the pressure of keeping everything hidden was unbearable. She texted Caleb back, "Tomorrow." The next day, Ryan sensed the distance between them widening. He wasn't a fool. The subtle changes in Emily's demeanor, the way she avoided his eyes, the way she flinched when he touched her, were all red flags. That afternoon, after finishing a long shift, he decided to come home early. Something in his gut told him to trust his instincts. When he walked through the door, the house was empty, save for a faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. His heart thudded in his chest as he noticed her phone charger still plugged in by the couch, but no phone in sight. Ryan knew where she was. He grabbed his keys and drove downtown, parking a block away from the hotel. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, but when he saw Emily step out of the building arm in arm with Jason, it felt like the air had been punched out of his lungs. He watched in stunned silence as they walked toward the street. Jason laughed at something, and Emily smiled. A smile Ryan hadn't seen in months. As they parted ways, Ryan's shock morphed into anger. He wasn't sure how yet, but he knew one thing for certain. The truth was coming. Ryan sat in his car for what felt like hours, watching people pass by on the busy street. The image of Emily and Jason arm in arm replayed in his mind like a haunting melody. His pulse throbbed in his ears as he fought the urge to storm into the hotel and demand answers. But he knew that an impulsive reaction wouldn't give him what he needed. He drove home instead, his thoughts swirling with anger, betrayal, and a dark sense of purpose. By the time Emily returned home that evening, the apartment was quiet. She set her keys down and exhaled, thinking the hardest part of her day was over. But as she walked into the living room, she froze. Ryan was sitting in the armchair, his face shadowed in the dim light. A glass of whiskey rested in his hand, untouched. "You're home early," Emily said, her voice tight. Ryan looked at her, his eyes cold and unrecognizable. "So are you." Emily swallowed hard. "Is something wrong?" He leaned forward, setting the glass down. "Where were you, Emily?" Her stomach twisted. "I was with Ashley." Ryan's jaw clenched, and he nodded slowly. "Funny. I just got off the phone with Ashley. She hasn't seen you in weeks." Emily's face paled. The lie had crumbled before she'd even had a chance to reinforce it. Ryan stood and walked toward her, the weight of the truth pressing down on both of them. "I know, Emily. I know about Jason." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She opened her mouth to deny it, but the look in his eyes told her it was pointless. He knew. "How long?" Ryan asked, his voice shaking. Tears welled in her eyes. It wasn't supposed to happen." Ryan's laughter was bitter and sharp. "That's not an answer." "6 months," she whispered. Ryan staggered back as if the words had struck him physically. 6 months? While I was at work, saving lives, you were with him?" Emily sobbed, her hands reaching out to him. "I made a mistake, Ryan. A horrible mistake." Ryan stepped back, avoiding her touch. Was it just him? The pause that followed was damning. Ryan's heart sank. "Caleb?" Emily nodded, barely able to look at him. The room seemed to close in around them. The life they'd built together, the memories they shared, all felt like cruel illusions. "2 men. Emily? You didn't just cheat. You shattered everything," Ryan said, his voice breaking. Emily dropped to her knees, sobbing. "Please. I love you." Ryan's face twisted with pain. "Love doesn't look like this." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily's cries filled the room, but Ryan felt numb. The next morning, Ryan was gone. He left a note on the counter. "I need space. I'll be staying with Chris for a while. Lucas and Ava deserve honesty, but I need time to figure out what that looks like." Emily sat at the table, reading the note over and over, her tears staining the paper. Ryan arrived at Chris's place late that morning, exhausted but resolute. Chris opened the door and pulled him into a hug. "No words needed," Chris said, handing Ryan a coffee. "I'm here." Ryan nodded, grateful beyond words. He needed time to heal, and he knew that healing wouldn't be easy. Meanwhile, Emily reached out to Rachel for support. "I've ruined everything," she confessed. Rachel's tone was gentle but firm. "You did, Emily. But the first step is owning that completely." The apartment felt empty without Ryan's presence. The kids noticed too, though Emily tried to mask the growing cracks in their family. But children sense things. Ava's questions became more pointed, and Lucas grew quieter. One evening, Emily overheard Ava ask, "Is Daddy mad at us?" Emily's heart shattered. "No, sweetheart. Daddy loves you so much." "But why isn't he home?" Ava whispered. Emily couldn't answer without breaking down. Ryan wasn't sure how long he would need, but he knew one thing. Trust wasn't something you patched up overnight, and love, no matter how strong, couldn't survive without it. The apartment was eerily quiet in Ryan's absence. Days passed, and though Emily went through the motions of life, packing school lunches, attending parent-teacher conferences, she felt hollow. The absence of Ryan's steady presence was a void she couldn't fill. The kids felt it too. Lucas grew quieter, lost in his thoughts, while Ava constantly asked when Daddy was coming home. At Chris's house, Ryan was adjusting to his new normal. Chris gave him the space he needed, but also knew when to step in. One evening, as they sat in the backyard with beers in hand, Chris spoke up. "What's the plan, man? You've got to figure out what's next." Ryan stared at the sky. "I don't know if I can ever forgive her." Chris nodded. "Forgiveness doesn't mean you have to stay. It's about moving on for your sake and for the kids." Ryan took a long sip of his beer. Chris's words hit hard, but deep down, Ryan knew they were true. Meanwhile, Emily was struggling. Rachel, ever loyal, tried to pull her out of the fog. "You need to be strong for Lucas and Ava," Rachel said during one of their phone calls. "This can't be about guilt anymore. It has to be about rebuilding." Emily knew Rachel was right, but the weight of her mistakes felt unbearable. A month after Ryan had left, he finally returned to the apartment, not to stay, but to talk. The kids ran to him as soon as he walked through the door. Ava hugged him tightly, while Lucas lingered, looking unsure. Ryan knelt down and pulled them both close. "I love you both so much," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Ava grinned through her tears. "Does this mean you're coming home?" Ryan glanced at Emily, who was standing silently near the dining table. "Not yet, sweetheart, but I'll always be here for you." Once the kids were in bed, Ryan and Emily sat down in the living room. Emily's eyes were red from crying. "Thank you for coming back today." Ryan nodded. "They needed to see me. I couldn't stay away forever." Emily wiped her hands nervously on her jeans. "Ryan, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know I'm trying to fix myself. I've started therapy. I've quit my job at the studio." Ryan's expression was unreadable. "That's a start, but it doesn't undo the past." "I know," Emily whispered. "I just want to be someone our kids can be proud of." "You should have thought about that before," Ryan said, his tone harsh but honest. Ryan stayed for dinner the following week, then the next. Slowly, they created a new routine, though it wasn't the same. The laughter they used to share felt distant, but the kids clung to these moments as signs of hope. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. It was amicable but bittersweet. Emily stayed in the apartment, while Ryan rented a modest house nearby to remain close to the kids. Lucas and Ava split their time between both homes, adjusting to the change better than Ryan had feared. Lucas became more confident, and Ava's giggles returned with time. Emily, however, struggled with loneliness. Jason had vanished from her life the moment the truth came out, and Caleb had faded into the background after her world imploded. She was left with the aftermath of her choices, facing the reality that her double life had cost her everything. Ryan, on the other hand, began to heal. Chris convinced him to join a local running group, and eventually, Ryan found solace in new friendships. He even started attending family events again without feeling like the room was closing in around him. One afternoon, As he watched Lucas score a goal at his soccer game, Ryan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Emily sat in the bleachers a few rows behind him, clapping and cheering. She caught Ryan's gaze and offered a small, hopeful smile. Ryan nodded but looked away. It wasn't bitterness, it was simply acceptance. The years passed, and the wounds became scars. Ryan found love again, though he took things slow, valuing honesty above all else. Emily rebuilt her life too, though she never remarried. Her focus remained on being the best mother she could be. Moral of the story: trust, once broken, may never fully heal, but resilience is found in the decision to choose yourself and those who matter most. Betrayal may break hearts, but it doesn't have to break the future. The end.